Welcome to the Past People, where I will talk about the people of the past. Ruth Ellis was a mother of two who sustained years of abuse at the hands of her boyfriend, David Blakley. In July 1955, she snapped and shot her abuser dead. This led to her arrest and execution at the hands of the British government. Her death by capital punishment gained momentum from the public as they attempted to save her life and stop executions. She would be the last woman to be executed in Britain. Her death gathered large crowds of ordinary folk in the street as she sipped her last glass of brandy and awaited her fate in her cell on the 13th of July 1955. People were lining the streets and somberly praying for her life. When she was taken for execution, the News Chronicle was present and they recorded that Ellis was the calmest woman who had ever been to the gallows, and how she had looked on a crucifix for a few seconds before she died, clearly at peace with her fate. She would go on to have a profound impact on Britain's legal system. Ellis was a young and naive young woman and mother. She was relatable to thousands of women up and down the country. She inspired thousands of Britons to send letters begging for a reprieve. They were backed by the Labour MP Sidney Silverman, who was campaigning for the abolishment of the death penalty already. She described Ellis: "She seems to be the most normal human, all too human, being weak, foolish, hypersensitive." Ellis and her boyfriend Blakley were extremely dysfunctional and often violent. She had been abused by him for months and had completely given up trying to make the relationship work. She was desperate for it to stop. So on Easter Sunday in 1955, she took a gun that was given to her by a friend, Desmond Cusson, to the Magdala Pub in Hampstead, where her boyfriend drank, and she shot him twice before standing over him and shooting him another 2 times. She wanted the police there, and luckily for her, there was an off-duty policeman who had proceeded to arrest her. She finally felt a sense of relief. The police investigated the pair's frantic and violent relationship and discovered that she had been in hospital with multiple bruises caused by Blakley striking the young mother. She had also suffered a miscarriage shortly before the murder, and it is believed to have been brought on by a blow to her stomach, potentially being the last straw in a long list of violent outbursts. During the trial, the judge deemed these extenuating circumstances as insufficient for a charge of manslaughter, and therefore she was sentenced to death for murder. Her physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her boyfriend was deemed irrelevant in the eyes of the law, and her defence fell short, highlighting the lack of inequality in the justice system at the time. When questioned on her intentions when she fired the gun at Blakley, she famously replied, "It is obvious that when I shot him, I intended to kill him." The public suspected she would be found guilty, as was often the case for abused women who snapped, but what shocked the public was the fact that she was sent to the gallows. 90% of women sentenced to death in the 20th century were reprieved for some reason or another. And Sarah Lloyd, who murdered her 87-year-old neighbour with a spade and boiling water, did not hang, and therefore it was assumed that her emotional distress and abuse would save her life. However, Ellis was not afforded this privilege, and it was a moment of tense emotion when the Governor of Holloway, Dr. Charity Taylor, informed Ellis in her death cell that despite her ongoing mistreatment, that no reprieve had been granted, and this caused uproar and outcry for her death penalty to be overturned by the public. The press was not consistent in their opposition to her execution. Stories were posted that suggested that just because she was a woman does not mean that she should not hang for her crime. Ellis was perceived to be promiscuous and was sexually immoral for not being married to David Blakley, and a lenient view could not be taken when she was associating with and receiving money from another man. Ellis was condemned for daring to be unmarried in a society built on shame, and this proved fatal for her. Alongside her perceived immoral compass, it was also suggested that because Ellis had had a gun to commit the murder, that it was premeditated, and so this went against her defence. However, the interpretation was out of step from the public opinion, and thousands of people signed petitions all over the country. 90% of the 600 letters, postcards and telegrams that still exist in the National Archives of the Home Office provide an insight into the minds of the public at the time. They were fighting for reprieve. Many of them wives and mothers themselves were worried about the mental well-being of her children if she was to hang, and the impact on her family was profound, and her son did go on to commit suicide. Many of these women were also subjected to abuse by their husbands, so Ellis provoked great empathy, and it was argued that Blakley's brutality had not sufficiently been considered at her sentencing. It was much more accepted at the time for husbands to hit their wives, and many explained that the murder was a crime of passion, and how only a woman understands that has been in the same position like myself and millions of others beaten by our husbands. The Women's Sunday Mirror wrote a serialized life story of Ellis over 4 weeks, referring to Blakley as a cad, vampire and parasite. There was little empathy for him, and the paper reported how he would smack my face and punch me when drunk, and on one occasion he lost all control. His fist struck me between the eyes and I fell to the floor. He then savagely beat me as I lay there. There were MPs already petitioning for the end of the death penalty during the commotion of Ellis's trial, making her sentence all the more controversial. The government already accused of 2 high-profile miscarriages of justice when the wrong person had been hung for a crime they did not commit. These cases propelled the problems with capital punishments into the national consciousness, and the death of Ruth Ellis amplified that influence further. 2 years after her death, the public succeeded in reflecting their sentiment in law. The Homicide Act 1957 limited the death penalty by restricting it to certain types of murder. It was then followed 8 years later by another act that would abolish the death penalty altogether. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.